Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. This will be our last class in the mini-series, turned out not to be so many, of War and Peace in Jewish Tradition. Where we left off was a couple of weeks we discussed about Mashiach and the Messianic era. And we are going to continue here, especially what happens during and after the Messianic era. For those who watched last week, and of course everyone can get on YouTube and our website those recordings and the WhatsApp, but we talked about that there were 10 different versions of how long the Messianic era would last, how miraculous it would be, or how natural it would be, and a certain progression from what we know of consciousness and reality in the world now to a very, very different kind of reality as the Messianic era plays itself out. So two of the areas that, if you're talking about the Messianic era, that have to be discussed, and then there'll be another aspect as well, and that is Techiyat HaMeitim and Olam Haba, the resurrection of the dead and the world to come. As we have stated many times, just like there are many opinions as to who the Mashiach will be, what he will accomplish, when it will happen, how long it will take, how miraculous or how natural, and how long the Messianic era will last. Likewise, there are many opinions as to what does the resurrection of the dead mean, and what is the reality of the world to come. So really there are no definitive answers other than the fact that we have a absolute tradition that these two events or periods of time will unfold, but the exact details of who will be resurrected, when they'll be resurrected, why they'll be resurrected, where they'll be resurrected, is up for differing opinions. So since this series is the general idea of war and peace, the reason I'm bringing this, because once Mashiach comes, there will be peace in the world. After the final wars are fought, and Mashiach is recognized and acknowledged throughout the world, then peace, a real peace, a lasting peace, an enduring peace will come to all of humanity. And so it's appropriate if in a series about war and peace, that's really why we've talked so extensively about Mashiach, because if you're going to talk about peace, it's only going to come with Mashiach in the Messianic era. So about the resurrection of the dead. So there are two major places in the Tanach, which is what we'll call the textual source. Of course, many of the ideas of Mashiach, world to come, and resurrection of the dead were handed down through the oral tradition and were based on prophecy and Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, revelations from God to different people in different generations in different ways. But the two most important places where the resurrection of the dead is mentioned is, and we've discussed it already, is in I believe it's the 38th chapter of Ezekiel, where he had this vision called the vision of the valley of dry bones, where God takes him out to a valley of dry bones and says to the prophet, can these bones live? And Ezekiel says, well, God, only you know. And God then commanded him to help put together these bones and reconstruct them into living human beings. And then a spirit of soul was blown into them, similar to how in the creation of human beings in the beginning, where God breathed into the nostrils of Adam the nishmat chayim, the soul of life, and Adam became a living being, became according to Onkelos, a speaking being, but he became a living being. And so there is a discussion in the Gemara, is this vision to be taken literally or allegorically? And for those who have been following, we discussed this at length. Rambam's opinion, Maimonides' opinion, that many of the prophecies about Mashiach and resurrection of the dead are allegories. Nonetheless, Rambam, the great rationalist, includes, it's actually the 13th of his 13 principles of faith, that we have Emunah Shalema, that there will be this event or this reality called the resurrection of the dead. So there's a discussion in the Gemara. No final answer is given. Many people feel that it was a real event. And there's even a discussion that people claim to have known some of the people who were resurrected. Others felt it was an allegory. But one place that we didn't discuss is in the book of Daniel. And it's in chapter 12, verse 2. And it says, and this is very, very specific, and many of those who sleep in the earth of dust shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. In other words, what Daniel was trying to express is that the resurrection of the dead was part of the final judgment that will include all of humanity as a transition between our reality now and the Messianic era and the world to come. But again, if you look at the sources and try to pin down exactly when the resurrection will happen, at the beginning of the Messianic era, in the middle, in the end, and how it will happen is left as a question. But nonetheless, it's a firm belief that we have that there will be such a reality called the resurrection of the dead. One time, Rav Ginsburg said it very, very simply. And he is going according really to the opinion of the Ramban. The Rambam also holds by Techiyat HaMeitim. As we said, he included it in his principles of faith, where bodies will be resurrected, however we understand that. But then some people say that it won't last. It is part of a bigger picture of judgment that will happen. That's what Daniel is alluding to, and some for everlasting life. But many hold that it's really just a transitional period leading to the world to come. As regards the world to come, I believe we mentioned this already. There's a verse that says that no eye has seen other than you, God. And the sages explain what is this referring to? No prophet was given the information or the vision or the prophecy to know exactly what the reality of the world to come is. No eye has seen except you, God. In other words, in all of the books of the prophets, whatever is written is about the Messianic era. It's not about the world to come. And here we do have a cardinal disagreement about the nature of the world to come. The Rambam and others feel that the world to come is a purely spiritual world, a world of souls with no connection to physical reality whatsoever. And many people understand it like that. The Ramban and many others feel that the world to come will also have an element of physicality. In other words, the way that the Rambam expresses his belief in the world to come, it's a different reality altogether. It's the reality of the soul before it comes down into a body, before it comes down into a material physical world. The soul will return, and this is after the resurrection of the dead. But at that point, the Rambam feels that the souls will be separated from any physicality and will live in a purely spiritual state. The Ramban disagrees, and others as well, and believes that the world to come, in a sense, is a further development of the Messianic era and the resurrection of the dead, and will have an element of physicality. As we mentioned before, there's a way to bridge the gap here, is that the reality of physicality will be so spiritual that we will not be able to differentiate between physical and spiritual. In other words, we've talked before about the terminology of vessel and light, where the vessel will become such a pure vessel that it will become nullified to the light. And we will not be able to differentiate between the vessel and the light. Without going into it very deeply, but when we talk about the four Kabbalistic worlds, the highest one being Atzilut, the world of emanation, and then as we descend, more and more physicality becomes part of those worlds. Then we have the world of Bria, the world of creation. That's where Yesh Me'ayin occurs, something from nothing. Then the world of Yetzirah, where physicality takes on form. And then we have this world, Olam Asiyah, the world of action. But we're told in the world of Atzilut, the highest level, there is no differentiation between light and vessel. It is a complete unity. And that's really what Kabbalah and Chassidut follow the opinion of the Ramban. And that the world to come will be a perfect union between physical and spiritual, to such a point, like I said, we will not differentiate. And this is similar to Rav Ginsburg's explanation of the resurrection of the dead, where he explains that the resurrection of the dead is a state where physical and spiritual will be able to be live and be enclosed in perfect unity. Okay, so now we have another idea that's connected to this, that's brought down in the Gemara. Many people have heard this, many people talk about this, and that's what's called the abolition of the commandments. That all of the commandments will become nullified. And part of these statements are, and they're different versions, but one of the versions is that in the time to come, la'atid lavo, that's the words in Hebrew, la'atid lavo, in the future to come. And here's where the somewhat gray area is the time to come in the Messianic era, or is it in the resurrection of the dead, or is it in the world to come? And again, many different opinions. Nonetheless, there is a tradition that the commandments will become nullified. And one of the expressions, and we quoted it, last week, is the idea that there's a tradition that after Mashiach comes, the only holiday that we'll keep is Purim. There are other versions. That a few of the other holidays as well. There are versions that say that when the third temple comes, animal sacrifices will no longer be given. Only the thanksgiving offering will be given, or only the grain offering will be given. So then the whole question is when is this expected to happen, and what does it mean that all of the mitzvot, all the commandments will become nullified? So again, there are many different opinions, but we have to understand whether Mashiach comes in a miraculous way or in a natural way. Everyone agrees that it will be a process, but reality as we know it now will simply no longer be. Reality will develop into something far more spiritual. As Isaiah says, that the knowledge of God will cover the earth like the waters cover the sea. And in another place, Isaiah says, we will no longer go by the light of the sun and the moon. We will go by the light of God. So all of these are, and we're going to get to a whole series of verses that we'll end the series with. But one of them is, God says, I will remove from you your heart of stone, and I will give you a heart of flesh. And what this means is a whole different state of human consciousness that we can touch a little bit now, we can taste, we get glimpses of, but we're talking about an enduring reality. And so some people say that the mitzvot will become null in the Messianic era. Others say that absolutely not, that in fact, just the opposite. And Rambam says, we will be able to perform the mitzvot in the most perfect way. Here, sometimes we struggle to understand the mitzvot, to observe the mitzvot, but we're told in the Messianic era they're not going to be nullified. In fact, they'll reach their ideal state. We'll understand them. That's why it says that one of the things that Mashiach will do is he'll reveal what's called ta'amei mitzvot, the reasons for the mitzvot. And you can imagine if we really understood the reasons from God's point of view, the divine reasons for all the mitzvah, we would be jumping out of our skin to do them, because now we really understand them. What a privilege it would be. So many people understand that when we're talking about the abolition of commandments, we're only talking about in the world to come. We're not talking about in the Messianic era. Other people, again, feel that it's a process. And this is connected to, just give me a second. This is connected to another idea which is discussed at length, and that is the abolition of the Yetzer Hara. That the evil inclination will be taken away, will be conquered, and will disappear. And this is actually connected to the opinion that the mitzvah will become null and void. Because the idea is, if we have no Yetzer Hara and we have no opposition to doing the mitzvot will become so natural, they will not be considered commandments anymore. And that's why it says it's somewhat not easy to understand, but the statement of the sages is the question is, who is greater? Someone who does a mitzvah, who is commanded to do the mitzvah, or someone who does a mitzvah who's not commanded and of their own free will does the mitzvah? So one might think that someone who's not commanded and takes it upon themselves to do the mitzvah, they are on a higher level. And the sages say, in a certain way, perhaps that is true on a certain level, but on a more basic level, someone who's commanded and does is on a higher level. Why? Because of the evil inclination. Because if you're not commanded, then you have no opposition to doing it. And so the idea, and that's why in the modern world, even the word commandment in English, like rubs people who have no religious inclination or Jewish background. If you talk about 613 commandments, it's like that flies in the face of the Western concept of freedom. I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I'm going to be commanded to do 613 mitzvah. And if we add the mitzvah from the rabbis, we're talking about 6 million mitzvahs. So the what's called the abolition of the Yetzer Hara is one of the explanations of that the commandments will be abolished, not because we won't be connected to these commandments, but they'll no longer be in the definition of commandment. They'll come so natural. And this is like Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah were told that they kept the Torah before it was given. And so there's a question, how did they know what to keep? It wasn't given yet. And so the answer was that they were on such a high intuitive level, they were keeping the mitzvot not necessarily in the way that we observe the mitzvot, but they were so connected to the spiritual reasons, to the spiritual foundations of the mitzvot. They were keeping them naturally on a spiritual level. So this is connected to what we're talking about. When we're talking about the mitzvah being abolished, is there's one way of seeing it, that we will continue to do the mitzvot in a full way, and then there'll come a stage where it will come so natural, we won't even think of mitzvah because there's no opposition, there's no yetzer hara. It'll just become a part of human consciousness that we won't consider them commandments anymore. Okay, so one time, when I think about it, this is actually part of the book of Rav Ginsburg called 5 Dynamics of Leadership That Could Change the World. This is a book that I had the great privilege of working with Rav Ginsburg on. We're going back around 30 years ago. Around 30 years ago. And it's a phenomenal book. I'm sure you can get it on the Gali Nai website. It's called 5 Dynamics of Leadership That Could Change the World. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. That is the subtitle. It's called Awakening the Spark Within. Awakening the Spark Within, 5 Dynamics of Leadership That Could Change the World. I believe at the end of the book, Rav Ginsburg tries to organize everything we've just said into 5 developments, 5 stages of, call it human development, or how history will play itself out. And so the first stage is, we're just talking about from the time that Mashiach comes. The first stage is Mashiach comes, like Rambam says, he gathers up the exiles in the 4 corners of the earth, rebuilds the temple, fights the last wars, and brings peace to the world. That is the first stage. That is the inception of the Messianic era, the revelation of Mashiach, and the Jewish people in the world recognizing this figure as Mashiach and recognizing that the world is about to fundamentally change completely. The second, Rav Ginsburg called it the transformation. And this was spoken about in Rambam. In fact, it's the very end of his treatment of the Mashiach, where he says that after Mashiach comes, there'll be no hunger, no war, no jealousy, no competition. And then he ends with, and the knowledge of God will cover the earth like the waters cover the sea. Malay et haaretz de'at Hashem kamayim liyam mechasim. So this represents Mashiach has come, and now human consciousness is going through a fundamental change. If anyone can imagine a world with no war, no competition, no hunger, and no jealousy, that means that human consciousness will be completely different than what we have today, because everyone has a good inclination, an evil inclination, and no matter what level we reach, there's still a yetzer hara. So, in fact, the Gemara says the greater the person, meaning spiritually, the greater their Yetzer. Meaning that no one gets a free pass in being able to just transcend the realities of this world. As long as there's a Yetzer Ra, the challenges of a righteous person are not the same challenges of someone on a lower spiritual level, but they don't go away. That's why no one is perfect. No one is perfect, and everyone has their challenges. The third stage that Rav Ginsburg says, this is what's called the resurrection of the dead. He says this is when physical and spiritual, light and vessel all become unified, and this sets the stage for the world to come. The fourth is the progression into the world to come. And this is what Rav Ginsburg says. This is where the statement Yom Shekulo Shabbos belongs. In this fourth stage of progression in the world to come, everything will be like Shabbos. All of reality will be Shabbosdik. May we experience it. Every Shabbos, we actually mention this. We mention Yom Shekulo Shabbos. And then the fifth stage is one that it's less known. It's called 50,000 Jubilees. This is a symbolic number. And this means that in the fourth progression, we've reached the world to come. And then the question, well, what happens in the world to come? And so one of the statements of the sages is that in the world to come, there is no rest for the tzaddikim. So that doesn't sound good, but it says because they will go michayil l'chayil. In other words, the world to come represents an constant elevation of soul without end. And that's this expression, 50,000 jubilees, represents infinite elevations, infinite transformations and transcendence. So these are the 5 stages that Rav Ginsburg kind of organized from all the different things we're talking about to try to get a perspective of what happens in what order. Okay, now what I want to do is, before we go on, I do want to go back slightly, because I would say of all the different stages or progressions that we're talking about, the most enigmatic, in a sense, is the resurrection of the dead. In a certain way, we could imagine a Messianic era. We could imagine the world of peace. We could imagine human consciousness changing. We could imagine a spiritual utopian existence in the world to come. The resurrection of the dead, it's very hard to get our head around, like, how will that happen? What does it mean? And so I just want to point out that there is we'll call it the event that will happen called the resurrection of the dead. And I didn't mention before, but according to almost everyone, there will actually be two stages of resurrection. The first stage will come early in the Messianic era, and that is exclusively for the great tzaddikim of the past, who will resurrect and will become, we'll call it the leadership of the Messianic era. And then there'll be what's called a general resurrection. But again, there's many opinions about who will be resurrected, for how long, and the very purpose of the resurrection. But what I want to point out is something that's very important to understand, that the concept of the resurrection of the dead, we can also understand it in the present moment as not this somewhat mysterious, mystical event that will happen in the future, but the idea of the resurrection of the dead goes very strongly with the whole idea of rebirth and renewal. Rebirth and renewal are absolute fundamental ideas in Judaism, especially in Chassidut. The idea of renewing ourselves on a daily level, of not falling into rote or routine, of always pushing ourselves for what's called a chiddush, a new way to look at life, a new way to live our lives. We see it in nature. We see, like, especially now, here we're coming out of winter, and you look at the trees, and the buds are about to burst. Here in Israel, many of the trees have already opened. But every year, in December, you see these barren trees. If you don't look carefully, you don't see the buds for the coming year. They look dead. But every year they are reborn with new buds and blossoms and leaves and fruit. And every morning when we wake up, the first thing we say is, Modani lefanecha. Thank you, God, for waking me up and giving me a new day. There's absolutely no guarantee that we are going to wake up when we go to sleep. And so, in a way, every time we wake up in the morning, it's a resurrection of the dead. And if we go, it would be a whole series in itself just to talk about all the different aspects of renewal and rebirth. The month of Nisan is a rebirth. The month of Tishrei is a rebirth. Every Rosh Chodesh is a rebirth. Every morning is a rebirth. So this idea of the resurrection of the dead is really part and parcel of a Jewish worldview, a Jewish spiritual worldview. So I just want to give you an example. Is in the Amidah, which we say 3 times a day, on Shabbos 4 times, every holiday 4 times, the Amidah, it starts the same way. And there are 3 blessings in the beginning. The first and the third, we are going to skip over. I'm going to go to the middle blessing. And it says, Ata gibor leolam Hashem, mechaye meitim ata rab lahoshia. You are forever strong, God. You resurrect the dead. You are great to redeem. That's the first. You're going to hear, we're going to have I believe it's 5 mentions of Techiyat HaMeitim in this middle blessing. That's how important it is. That was the first one. Then it says, Mechalkel Chayim B'Chesed, Mechaye Meitim B'Rachamim Rabim. He gives us life with loving kindness, and he resurrects the dead with great compassion. Okay, and then I'm just going to read quickly in Hebrew. Somech Noflim, he lifts up the fallen, Rofei Cholim, he heals the sick, Umatir Asurim, and he frees those that are bound up. Umakayem Emunato Lishenei Afar, and he fulfills his faithfulness to those who lie in the dust. Who is like you, the master of strength, Umido Melach, and who is like you, Melech Meimit Umachaye Umatzmiach Yeshua, the king who causes one to die and causes one to live again and makes salvation sprout. Ne'aman atah lachayot meitim, you are faithful to resurrect the dead. Baruch atah Hashem mechayei meitim. Blessed are you, God, who resurrects the dead. Let me just count. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's 5. 5 mentions of Techiyat HaMeitim. And the reason I wanted to read this is that we need to understand that it's not just talking about a future event. It's talking about a way to live our lives of renewal, rebirth, change, growth, and the whole Jewish calendar is based on renewal. That's why we have a lunar calendar. Every month is a totally new energy. And in our prayers every day, we say, Uvetuvo mechadesh b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshit. In his goodness, he renews the work of creation every single day. And as discussed, we now know from physics, it's every billionth of a second. God's influx of energy is coming in and out of existence. All of creation is being literally renewed it's not even a billionth, it's a trillion. I mean, I don't even have a number for it. But it's all a renewal of God's influx of energy. So this idea of Techiyat HaMeitim, it's very important to comprehend it as a living reality. And I didn't mention one other thing, and that is very simply the whole idea of reincarnation is Techiyat HaMeitim. Is someone lives and dies, and then they are reborn again, and they get another chance to fix up or to improve, or for whatever reason that person is reincarnated. But reincarnation is like a Techiyat HaMeitim. Okay, now I've chosen a few of many, many, many verses in the Tanach about peace. We want to end our series here with lots of hope and optimism and understanding the great importance of peace in our tradition. And so we're going to start. Everything is based on the 5 books, the Chumash. In other words, all of the prophecies of the prophets are all based on the prophecies of Moshe in the book of Devarim. It's all there. It's all there. Later, God, depending on the circumstances and the generation, revealed more and more about when certain things would happen and why. But it's all based on the Chumash. So in Parshat Bechukotai, in the book of Vayikra, so it says like this. It begins, Im bechukotai telechu, if you walk in my ways, v'et mitzvotai tishmaru, and you guard my mitzvot, v'asitim otam, and you do them, then there's a series of blessings, and then there's a series of curses that begin. But if you don't follow my ways, and you don't listen to the mitzvot, and you don't do them, then there's a string of curses. This is what's called cause and effect. Mida keneged mida, a measure for measure, and the consequences. But here in the blessings, it says like this: V'natati shalom ba'aretz. God is speaking here. I will place peace in your land. Ushkavtem v'ein macharit, and you will be settled, and no one will make you afraid. Ishbati chaya ra'am in arts, and I will make wild animals. And this is not just the animal kingdom. It represents, including the Yetzer Hara. I will take them out of the earth. V'cherev lo tavor b'artzachem, and the sword will not pass through your land. So here we see the blessing of peace in the book of Vayikra. Okay, now we're going to go to a series of prophecies from Isaiah, Yeshayahu. And here I'm only reading a few of them. The theme of salvation, redemption, and peace runs through all of the prophets, especially Isaiah. So here it says like this: Ki yeled yulad lanu ben, a son will be born to us. Benitan, this is talking about Mashiach. Benitan lanu v'tehiyeh hamisra, and it will be given to him the authority, al shichmo, on his shoulders, vayikra shemo, and his name will be Pele Yoetz El Gibor Avi Ad Sar Shalom. There's different ways to interpret this, but he will be wondrous of advice, an authority of strength, and a father and of a prince of complete peace. The point here is his name is Sar Shalom. Actually, he's not a boy anymore. He has, I think, 5 or 6 children of his own. But his name is Yisrael Sar Shalom. From this verse, a prince of peace. A prince of peace. And then it continues, Lemarbeh hamisra u'leshalom ein kates. Al kisei David v'al mamlachto lachin ota l'sa'ada b'mishpat u'b'tzedakah. I'll end there. So, and it says, and he will increase. So one second here. He will increase the authority, the realm, and there will be peace without end. So many of these phrases from Isaiah appear throughout Jewish tradition, literature, poetry, songs. And here he's saying that when Mashiach comes, there'll be peace without end, everlasting peace. Now, I want to point out that the first word in this verse, lemarbeh hamisra, he will increase the kingdom, the authority, the realm. In this word, if anyone wants to look it up, this is Isaiah 9:6. In the word lemarbeh, the mem in the word is a final mem. This is the only place in the entire Tanach where a final letter is written in the middle of a word. It's written as a final letter in the middle of the word. And it's there because, again, marbeh, to increase. This is like to get our attention, because it says, Shalom ad en kates. Shalom will be increased to such a level that it will be infinite. And so the mem is a final mem. It's like indicative that this is the final revelation of peace in the world. Okay, now we're going to the 32nd chapter of Isaiah. Again, this is talking about Mashiach, the Messianic era. It says, V'haya ma'aseh et tzedakah shalom. V'avodat et tzedakah hashket v'betach ad olam. That the action of charity, of good deeds, of loving kindness is shalom. And that the acts of charity will bring quiet and security ad olam, forever. Again, the world will be filled with goodness, love, peace, and charity. Now we go to the 45th chapter of Isaiah, the 7th verse. And this is a verse that is included in our morning prayers, but with a slight difference. It says, Yotzer or uvarei choshech, oseh shalom. Now that everyone recognizes that. This is right after we say Baruch Hu in the morning service. We say, talking about God, He forms light and He creates darkness. He makes peace. And then in our prayers, we say, Uvorei et hakol, and He creates everything. But the original is Uvorei ra, and He creates evil. In other words, He creates the possibility of evil. And the verse ends, Ani Hashem oseh kol elah. In other words, in a sense, God is admitting, I created the Yetzer Tov. I also created the Yetzer Hara. I have my purpose to this. My purpose is that everyone should be able, through having a good and evil inclination, to have true free will, and through that merit to become an image of God. But this is just interesting because we say this every day, and many people are not aware where it comes from, and that in the original, it's a bit different. The sages felt it was a little bit harsh to say, and he creates evil without a whole explanation. So they changed it to Uvarei et Hakol. Now we're in the 57th chapter of Isaiah, the 19th verse. Borei niv safatayim. God says, I will create a new type of expression. Shalom, shalom l'rachok u'lekarov. Amar Hashem urfativ. What's this new expression that God will create? Peace, peace to those far away and to those close. This is what God says, and he will heal you. In other words, peace is the ultimate healing. Okay, so I'm going through these relatively quickly just to show you how important the idea of peace is and how important it's part of our vision of the Messianic era. Okay, one more from Isaiah chapter 66, verse 12. Kiko amar Hashem, hineni note aleha kinahar shalom, ukenachal shotef. Thus God says, I am, one second. I will extend peace like a river and like a ever-flowing stream. And actually, this is the verse, my last music CD is called River of Peace, from this verse, that God will extend peace like a everlasting flowing stream. Such a beautiful imagery. Now we go to Ezekiel. Excuse me. The 34th chapter, 25th verse. If you remember in the book of Bamidbar, the whole story of Pinchas, and Pinchas was rewarded with a Briti Shalom, my covenant of peace. And we said he is the only person who is given this this accolade, this gift from God of a covenant of peace. But here we see in Ezekiel, we see, one second, that God promises all of Israel a covenant of peace in the future. And this is what it says. The Karati Lahem Brit Shalom, and I will make with them a covenant of peace. V'hishbati Chaya Ra'amin Oretz. This, now you can see how it all comes from the 5 books, where the prophet repeats, I will cause to cease the wild animals in the land. Remember, we read that from the Parshat Bechukotai. V'yashvu b'midbar lebetach, and they will dwell in the desert in security. V'yeshku b'ya'arehem. Excuse me. And they will be able to even sleep in the woods and not be afraid. I'm just looking for it because there's a second time that Ezekiel, let's see, maybe it's here, also promises a covenant of peace. No, I can't find it right now, but I believe there's a second time that he promises all of Israel a covenant of peace. Now we go to the Psalms, to Tehillim, the 34th Psalm, the 14th verse. And this is a very, very important verse. It says, Sur meira v'asei tov bakei shalom v'radfehu. Turn away from evil and do good. Seek peace and run after it. Now, when you study Chassidut, when you study the teachings of Chassidut, and there are many, many Rebbes, thousands of Hasidic Svarim, but when you look at like the major Rebbes of the Hasidic movement, each one of them had their themes that they would repeat over and over again. I'm just mentioning this because one of the most popular books of Chassidut now is Netivot Shalom from the Slonim Rebbe. And this verse, and I don't think I'm exaggerating, he repeats in his different Torahs scores of times, maybe even hundreds. He's constantly going back to this verse. Turn from evil and do good, seek peace and pursue it. This is one of the biggest themes in the Slonim Rebbe's Netivot Shalom. Again, in Tehillim, the 119th Psalm, the 164th verse. And this is included in the morning prayers, at the end of the morning prayers in Nusach Sfard. In Nusach Sfard, this is said every day. Shalom Rab Lo'avei Toratecha. Great peace will come to those who learn your Torah. Ve'ein lamo mikshol, and there will be no like obstacle for them. And then it continues. But the idea of call it the reward for being connected to Torah is absolute peace, great peace. Again, in Psalms, the 122nd Psalm, Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Ask about the peace of Yerushalayim. Yishaluya Oavayich. That it's built in a compact way. Yehi Shalom B'chelech Shalva B'romanatayich. There will be peace in its portion and pleasantness in its palaces. L'man achai v'raya yadaber shalom bach. For the sake of my brothers and friends, I will speak to you of shalom. L'man beit Hashem Elokeinu avaksha tov lach. And for the sake of the house of God, our God, I will seek out good for you. So Reb Shlomo made up a couple of songs to these verses, and many other people made up songs to these verses also. So this is, I'll just sing them a quick, you'll recognize them. Laman achai v'rei, Laman achai v'rei, Adabrana, Shalom Bach. And then it continues. And the other one he made up is Yehi Shalom Be'echelech Shalva Be'romanotayich Yehi Shalom Be'echelech Shalva Be'romanotayich Yehi Shalom Be'echelek Shalva Be'romanotayich Yehi Shalom Be'echelek Shalva Be'romanotayich. And the last one, it's really not the last, it's the last one that I've chosen. As I said, there are scores of more verses that talk about the importance of shalom, the promise of shalom, the gift of shalom. And the last one we'll do is from the book of Mishlei, from Proverbs. This is chapter 3, verse 17. And this we repeat every time we return the Torah to the ark. We use this verse. Darachecha darchei noam. This is talking about the Torah. Its ways are ways of pleasantness. V'chol netivoteha shalom. And all of its pathways are peace. And we repeat every time we return the ark to the Torah to the ark, we say this verse, and many songs have been made up to this. And of course, this is talking about that the ultimate goal of the Torah is to bring peace to the world, peace to the individual, peace between people, peace in communities, peace in Israel, peace between Israel and the world. That is the ultimate goal. And so we have now finished many months of discussing war and peace in Jewish tradition. We began it shortly after the war broke out here on October 7th, and it is still raging. It is still raging, and we have a ways to go. We have a ways to go. And one of the first things we learned was from Shlomo Melech in Ecclesiastes. There's a time for war and there's a time for peace. Unfortunately, this is a time for war. This is a war that was not started by us. It's a war that we certainly didn't want, but Jewish tradition is not embarrassed that if we're at war, then we should win the war. There's nothing to be embarrassed about that. Unfortunately, the world doesn't understand this. As we've said, the world can't get its head around, or even stronger, can't stomach the idea of Israel being victorious. As long as we're the victim, we could be sympathized with. But Israel as being victorious, the world just doesn't like it. There's 2,000 years of conditioning that the world has to break. On the other hand, we don't fight with, like, let's say, with relish. It's something that has to be done for self-defense. That, as the prophet said, the time will come that the sword will not pass through our land. That's what we want more than anything. More than anything, we want peace between us and our neighbors, between us and the nations. And we will pursue it until we get there. But right now, we don't have to, we shouldn't be embarrassed to say we have a war to win. And as anyone following the news knows, that in the last couple of weeks, the pressure from the world for us not to win has increased incredibly. And so we find ourselves not completely wrong, actually. I have to say, I read in the Wall Street Journal today 2 articles, 2 editorials saying, just let Israel win and it will be over. By not letting Israel win and making all kinds of red lines is only going to perpetuate this whole situation for generations. And they said it outright. They said, just get out of the way and let Israel win this war that it has to win for its own survival. So we end our series with the reality of war. I mentioned on Sunday's class that we're far from over with this. We're actually far from over. There's a lot more coming, and we need to be strong. We need to be proud of our identity. We need to stand with Israel, and we need to stand against the anti-Semitism. Matisyahu had his last 3 concerts canceled. Like, there's something really rotten going on here. There's something really, really rotten. There was an event in a shul in New Jersey. 1,000 Hamas supporters showed up, and it got really ugly. It was an event inside the shul, a private event. So we have a ways to go here. But I want to end with the idea that sur meira v'aseh tov b'kei shalom v'radfehu, that we should never, ever, ever give up our vision of peace, our hope for peace, our determination to lead the world to peace. This is part and parcel of who we are as a people, and we will never give up on that. We believe that peace will come, and may we merit to see a true and lasting peace in the world soon and in our days.